The prevailing wisdom regarding conversational competence invariably circles back to an active passive reception. Listen, a directive so ubiquitous it has calcified into a truism. The pursuit of conversational efficacy, a pathetic industry built on the assumption that humans require instruction in receiving sound, begins, predictably, with a directive, listen, as if the act of existing doesn't already subject us to an unending torrent of auditory and visual data, a constant bombardment that necessitates a filtering mechanism, if not outright psychic shielding. But no, we must learn to listen. The implication is that we haven't been doing it, that our ears are mere decorative orifices and our brains vacant lots awaiting the seed of someone else's pronouncements. The cacophony of voices, each clamoring to be heard, is a symphony of desperation. It has given rise to a culture where the loudest, most articulate, or most cunning speaker is often the one who prevails, regardless of the actual content of their message. The perception that speaking is the primary means of achieving conversational success has become an article of faith, a dangerous one. The result is that people are more focused on perfecting their speaking skills than on cultivating the far more essential art of listening. The modern obsession with mastering the art of conversation is a grotesque spectacle, much like watching a mime perform at a funeral. People flock to workshops, devour self-help books, and hire coaches, all to perfect their ability to dominate the dialogue and exploit others. They conveniently forget that conversation is fundamentally a two-way exercise in mutual bartering. These eager students are convinced that the secret to conversational mastery lies in the ability to commandeer the spotlight, much like Nero fiddling while Rome burned. The view that listening is a skill acquired through childhood indoctrination, teachers and parents dispensing wisdom like medicinal gruel, represents an insidious form of social conditioning. This framing positions genuine inquiry not as an exercise in critical thought, but as a form of obedience, a passive acceptance of authority. There is a suggestion that the purpose of conversation is not to challenge, question, or dismantle, but simply to absorb. This dynamic resembles a linguistic form of Stockholm Syndrome. One of the books illustrates the consequences of auditory myopia from history and literature. For instance, Julius Caesar's failure to heed the warnings of his wife and the soothsayer ultimately led to his downfall, a fate that might have been avoided had he been attentive to the counsel of others. Similarly, Othello's tragic demise was precipitated by his decision to prioritize the treacherous Iago over the loyal Desdemona. Moreover, Macbeth's hubris and Hamlet's indecision, both rooted in their failure to heed wise counsel, Moshe chedrus decima, Moshe che. In the tale of Tara, a recent transplant, and her neighbor Connor, a horticultural zealot, unfolds a modern-day tragedy that would make even Sioran weep with existential despair. Tara, in her quest to avoid meaningful engagement, delivered what can only be described as the world's most menacing, To frame the conflict as a failure of active listening is to mistake a power struggle, for a misunderstanding. Connor didn't require Tara's enthusiastic endorsement of his arboreal pruning, Hoster's BNS entrachment. He needed her silence. This performance art piece, delivered with the precision of a clockwork orange, led to a tree-trimming incident that would make even the most jaded Shakespearean character pause for thought. If only Socrates had been there to ask Tara a few pointed questions about the nature of consent and the meaning of, perhaps the tree would still be standing. The assertion that conversational discord manifests as arboreal assault and subsequent vocal outrage is a quaintly reductive observation. It implies a linear causality, a simple equation of pruning shears and raised voices, conveniently ignoring the underlying currents of resentment, territoriality, and the baffling absurdity of human interaction. One pictures Nietzsche observing this suburban drama not with amusement, but with a weary sigh. The workplace, predictably, fetishizes active listening as a managerial skill. A cynical exercise in extracting productivity masked as empathy. Employees complain that they are unheard and that managers prioritize directives over understanding, a self-fulfilling prophecy. The manager, focused on output, fails to recognize that genuine engagement stems from reciprocal respect, a fundamental misunderstanding of human motivation. In the analysis of the corporate battlefield where HR departments conduct postmortems on failed teams, the common denominator emerges: managers who mistake silence for agreement, much like ancient Puranists mistaking stillness for wisdom. These managers, armed with MBAs and PowerPoint presentations, wander through their organizational labyrinth, blind to the forest for the trees, specifically, the trees that Tara's neighbor Connor so enthusiastically pruned. The workplace, that modern coliseum, has elevated listening to the status of a sacred ritual, complete with voodoos like active listening and empathetic engagement. Yet, as Wittgenstein noted, the limits of my language define the limits of my world. In our case, the limits of our listening define the limits of our sanity. When we do listen, truly listen, it is often for strategic purposes like a chess player counting possible moves. We analyze tone, body language, and subtext with the intensity of a detective solving a noir mystery. We learn not just about the speaker's thoughts, but about their hidden agendas, unspoken desires, and buried regrets. We become anthropologists of the mundane, dissecting every like ancient texts. The modern instruction manual for effective listening is a guide for navigating a minefield while wearing a blindfold and juggling hand grenades. Here's the corporate-approved version. Step 1. Create a vacuum where conversation should occur. Step 2. Pretend you're building a bridge while actually dismantling it. Step 3. Pour energy into a black hole that promises to return nothing. The anecdote concerning Tom, the contractor, presented as proof of the power of empathetic listening, is an egregious example of narrative manipulation. Tom, distracted by the impending cognitive decline of his mother, requires not a sympathetic ear, but a neurologist. Penelope's decision to remain silent, framed as an act of selfless compassion, is merely a demonstration of her own intellectual laziness. The implication that her knowledge was irrelevant is a convenient excuse for her inability to offer meaningful assistance. The truly skilled conversationalist understands that listening isn't a prelude to speaking, it's a form of intelligence gathering, a reconnaissance mission into the other person's internal landscape. What do they fear? What do they desire? Armed with this knowledge, one can craft a response that resonates. The 9 steps to effective listening, presented with the solemnity of a religious decree, are a testament to the pervasive infantilization of modern discourse. At best, they are as believable as the CEO's promise of work-life balance. Let's give this sacred text the cursory glance it deserves with the skepticism of Sextus Empiricus. Taschen. Set specific goals for listening. How quaint, as if the act of auditory processing were subject to performance metrics and strategic planning. Prepare to listen with an open mind. Stop talking. A self-evident directive presented as a profound insight. Frankly, I couldn't be bothered to go through all 9. Picture the scene, a manager, armed with his corporate wisdom, prepared to break the news to his mother that her driving days are over. Like a Shakespearean tragedy, he approaches the conversation with the gravity of an execution order. "What will you miss most?" he asks, with the sensitivity of a bull in a china shop. The mother, clutching her steering wheel like a holy relic, responds with the raw emotion of a character in a Camus novel. The manager, ever the corporate diplomat trained in effective listening, suggests shopping together, a solution as brilliant as suggesting meditation to a drowning man. He transforms the loss of independence into a bonding opportunity, like turning a funeral into a birthday party. A breathtaking display of analytical laziness is portraying listening as a highly valued skill in the workplace, an elixir for disgruntled employees and ineffective managers. It implies that the root of all organizational dysfunction lies not in systemic inequalities, but in a simple failure of auditory perception. In the corporate wilderness, these listening signals have become as authentic as a Rolex from a street vendor. Managers learn to perform the ritual of eye contact and nodding, their attention divided between the speaker and their mental checklist. The physical signs of attention, eye contact, leaning forward, open posture, are performed with the mechanical precision of a robot programmed to simulate empathy. Wasn't there something about focus on the feet in an earlier chapter? These gestures, once markers of genuine interest, now serve as elaborate smokescreens for disengagement. The daughter, Wendy, starts accessorizing questionable life choices with a vocabulary previously reserved for dock workers. Her father, presented with his blossoming rebellion, seeks guidance, a manual for navigating the predictable wreckage of adolescence. The text metaphor of the pool of meaning is a clever but ultimately delusional attempt to quantify human communication. It's like trying to measure the depth of the ocean with a ruler. The surface might be clear, but the depths are dark and complex. The father's told that dialogue is the answer. A curious proposition, as if suggesting a polite conversation will disarm a charging rhinoceros. The father, armed with his AMPP toolkit like a knight charging into battle with a foam sword, taps on Wendy's door. A gesture so formal it might make a butler blush, only to face her with the enthusiasm of a teenager at a mandatory family reunion. "Wendy, may I talk with you, please?" He pleads, while she responds with the gravitas of a Supreme Court justice. "Whatever." The core argument that silence or aggression stem from a perceived lack of safety is presented as a revelation, genius. As if generations haven't already intuited that screaming at someone rarely encourages thoughtful discourse. The pivot to a model of internal states to diagnose motivations is a dangerous game bordering on psychological colonialism. To assume the source of another's distress is to reduce a complex individual to a predictable algorithm. The advice, apologize, clarify intent, find mutual purpose, reads like a corporate training manual for hostage negotiators. The sequence, ask, mirror, paraphrase, and prime, is a funhouse mirror, distorting reality just enough to make it recognizable. "So, you're upset because I expressed concern about your wardrobe choices," the observer might say, channeling the spirit of a diplomatic negotiator in a war zone. The subject's response is likely to be as enigmatic as a goldfish giving a lecture on the hydrodynamic principles of buoyancy. The hospital anecdote, the clerk feigning interest and performative concern, is a trivial observation. Most interactions are transactional, superficial, and ultimately meaningless. Genuine expressions of care are rare and often unwelcome. To expect empathy from a healthcare worker is to mistake their professional obligations for genuine human connection. Next is simply a societal dismissal, a bureaucratic shrug. "Your discomfort is irrelevant to my efficiency metrics." We ask, "How are you?" Not because we genuinely want to know, but because it's a social lubricant, a ritualistic performance designed to maintain a fragile facade of civility. The entire agree, build, compare sequence is a blueprint for intellectual subjugation, a formalized method for eroding critical thinking and replacing it with compliant conformity. It's the operational manual for thought control, meticulously crafted and presented as a pathway to understanding. It's a delusion, a comforting fiction designed to shield the practitioner from the realization that genuine understanding rarely arises from forced consensus. More often, it emerges from the friction of disagreement, the uncomfortable clash of opposing viewpoints, the courageous willingness to confront uncomfortable truths. The alternative is not chaos, but authenticity. A refusal to sacrifice intellectual integrity on the altar of social harmony. The advice is clear: create safety, apologize when necessary, find mutual purpose, and above all, listen with genuine intent. But let's be honest, we're all experts at "I'm here for you," delivered with the same sincerity as a rote response. In the end, listening has become less about human connection and more about damage control. We've transformed the natural act of dialogue into a series of tactics. Every question is a carefully calculated probe, every pause a potential ambush. The irony lies not in our inability to listen, but in our desperate need to pretend we're listening at all.